The morning sun cast long shadows across the desert floor as Captain Jake Reaper Morrison adjusted his helmet one final time. The Apache helicopter sat like a sleeping predator on the tarmac, its sleek black frame gleaming under the harsh Middle Eastern sun. Today would mark his 47th combat mission in the region, but something felt different about this one. Jake had been flying Apache attack helicopters for 8 years, ever since graduating from flight school at Fort Rucker. His co-pilot and gunner, Lieutenant Sarah Chun, was running through her pre-flight checklist with a methodical precision that had kept them both alive through countless missions. They made a good team. Jake handled the flying, while Sarah managed the weapons systems and kept track of ground intelligence. Control tower to Reaper 1, the radio crackled. You're cleared for takeoff. Your mission coordinates are uploaded to your navigation system. Jake pressed the transmit button. Reaper 1 to tower. Roger that. We're lifting off now. The Apache's twin engines roared to life as Jake pulled up on the collective. The helicopter rose smoothly from the landing pad, its rotor blades cutting through the morning air with a distinctive whoop-whoop-whoop sound that every soldier in the area knew by heart. Within minutes, they were flying over the endless expanse of desert terrain that had become Jake's second home. Their mission briefing had been straightforward. Intelligence reports suggested that a small group of insurgents had set up a weapons cache in a remote village about 60 miles northeast of their base. The village had been abandoned for months, making it an ideal hiding spot for enemy fighters who wanted to store rockets and ammunition away from prying eyes. Jake and Sarah's job was to locate the cache and destroy it before the weapons could be moved to more populated areas. Sarah, what's our ETA to the target zone? Jake asked through the intercom. 32 minutes at current speed, she replied, her eyes scanning the instrument panel. Weather looks clear all the way there. No sign of storm systems that might complicate our approach. Jake nodded and settled in for the flight. The landscape below them was a mix of rocky outcroppings and flat desert plains, broken occasionally by dried-up riverbeds that snaked across the terrain like ancient scars. It was beautiful in its own harsh way, but Jake had learned not to let the scenery distract him. This region had a way of turning deadly without warning. As they flew deeper into enemy territory, Jake's mind wandered to the conversation he'd had with his wife Linda the night before. She was back home in Texas with their 2 young children, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy while her husband flew dangerous missions on the other side of the world. The video call had been brief. The base's internet connection was unreliable, but hearing her voice had reminded him of everything he was fighting to protect. Jake, I'm picking up radio chatter on the enemy frequencies, Sarah announced, pulling him back to the present. Sounds like Arabic, but I can't make out what they're saying. Could be nothing, or it could mean they know we're coming. Keep monitoring it, Jake replied. And let me know if you hear anything that sounds like coordinates or tactical information. The Apache continued its steady flight path toward the target village. Jake had flown this route several times before on different missions, and he knew the terrain well. There were several small hills and rocky formations that provided good cover for ground forces, which meant they needed to stay alert for potential ambushes. The insurgents in this area were known for their tactical intelligence and their ability to set effective traps for coalition aircraft. 20 minutes into the flight, Sarah spotted something unusual through her targeting system. Jake, I'm seeing vehicle tracks in the sand about 2 miles ahead of us. Looks like several trucks passed through this area recently. The tracks are fresh, probably made within the last day or 2. Jake adjusted their flight path slightly to get a better view of the tracks. Sure enough, there were clear tire marks in the sand, indicating that multiple vehicles had traveled through the area in convoy formation. This was significant because the intelligence reports had suggested that the weapons cache was being supplied by truck convoys that operated under cover of darkness. Good catch, Sarah. Mark those coordinates, and we'll include them in our mission report. Could be useful for planning future operations in this sector. As they approached the target village, Jake began to feel the familiar mixture of adrenaline and focused calm that came with entering a potentially dangerous situation. He had learned to trust his instincts over the years, and Right now, those instincts were telling him to stay extra vigilant. The radio chatter that Sarah had detected earlier was continuing, though it remained difficult to understand. The village came into view as they crested a small ridge. It looked exactly as described in their mission briefing, a cluster of small buildings arranged around a central courtyard, with a few larger structures that might have once been shops or meeting halls. The entire settlement appeared to be abandoned, with no signs of civilian activity or normal daily life. Reaper 1 to base command. Jake radioed. We have visual contact with the target village. Beginning our reconnaissance sweep now. Base command to Reaper 1. Roger that. You're cleared to investigate the area and engage any confirmed hostile targets. Be advised that we have lost contact with a ground patrol that was operating in your general area earlier today. This news made Jake's stomach tighten slightly. A missing ground patrol could mean several things, none of them good. It might indicate that enemy forces in the area were more numerous or better organized than intelligence had suggested. It could also mean that his Apache might be flying into a situation that was more complex than originally planned. Sarah, did you hear that about the missing patrol? Yes, I caught it. We should probably expand our search pattern to look for any signs of them. Could be that they're pinned down somewhere and need assistance. Jake agreed and began to modify their approach to the village. Instead of flying directly toward the settlement, he took the Apache in a wide circle around the area, using Sarah's advanced optics to scan for any signs of the missing soldiers or unusual enemy activity. The desert seemed quiet and empty, but Jake knew that appearances could be deceiving in this part of the world. As they completed their first circle around the village, Sarah suddenly stiffened in her seat. Jake, I'm picking up movement in one of the buildings. Looks like at least 3 individuals, possibly more. They're trying to stay hidden, but I can see them moving from room to room. Are they armed? Can't tell for certain from this distance, but their movement patterns suggest military training. They're using proper cover and concealment techniques. Jake felt his pulse quicken. This was the moment when a routine mission could quickly turn into something much more serious. If the people in the building were insurgents guarding the weapons cache, they would likely be heavily armed and prepared to fight. If they were members of the missing patrol, they might be wounded or trapped and desperately in need of help. I'm going to bring us in closer for a better look, Jake announced. Keep your weapon systems ready, but don't engage unless I give the order or unless they fire at us first. The Apache descended toward the village, its engines growing louder as Jake reduced altitude. Through his cockpit window, he could see the building where Sarah had spotted movement. It was a 2-story structure made of mud brick and concrete, with several windows that provided good vantage points for anyone inside. Suddenly, Sarah's voice cut through the intercom with urgent intensity. Jake, I've got multiple heat signatures lighting up my thermal imaging. There are at least 15 to 20 people positioned throughout this village, and they're all carrying weapons. This isn't a simple weapons cache. It's a full enemy stronghold. Before Jake could respond, the radio crackled with a transmission in heavily accented English. American helicopter, you are surrounded. Land your aircraft immediately and surrender, or we will shoot you down. Jake's training kicked in instantly. He pulled hard on the collective and banked the Apache sharply to the right, gaining altitude as quickly as possible. At the same time, Sarah was already tracking multiple targets through her weapons systems, her finger hovering over the trigger controls. Base command, this is Reaper 1, Jake called over the radio. We have stumbled into a major enemy position. Request immediate backup and close air support. This is not a simple weapons cache. Repeat, this is a fortified enemy stronghold with significant manpower. The response from base command was swift and professional. Reaper 1, backup is en route. Estimated arrival time is 25 minutes. You are authorized to engage enemy targets and defend yourself as necessary. As Jake continued to gain altitude and distance from the village, he could see muzzle flashes beginning to appear from several buildings below. The insurgents were opening fire with small arms and what appeared to be heavy machine guns. The range was still too great for their weapons to be effective against the Apache, but That would change quickly if Jake allowed them to get closer. Sarah, what's our weapons status? All systems green. I have 30 Hydra rockets, 700 rounds of 30 millimeters ammunition, and our full complement of Hellfire missiles. Whatever they're planning down there, we have enough firepower to handle it. Jake began to formulate a tactical plan in his mind. The enemy clearly had superior numbers and the advantage of prepared defensive positions, but the Apache's mobility and firepower could level the playing field if used correctly. The key would be to stay mobile and avoid giving the insurgents time to coordinate their anti-aircraft defenses. I'm going to set up a firing pattern that keeps us moving while you engage targets of opportunity, Jake explained. Focus on any heavy weapons positions first, then work your way through their personnel. We need to keep them pinned down until backup arrives. The Apache swooped down toward the village in a controlled attack run, with Sarah's targeting system locking onto the first enemy position. As they approached effective firing range, Jake could see insurgents running between buildings, some carrying what appeared to be rocket-propelled grenades or shoulder-fired missiles. Jake, I'm seeing at least 2 RPG teams setting up firing positions. They're trying to get a clear shot at us. Take them out first. Those are our biggest immediate threat. Sarah's finger squeezed the trigger, and the Apache's 30mm chain gun roared to life. The high-explosive rounds tore through the mud brick walls of the building where the RPG team had been positioned, sending clouds of dust and debris flying into the air. Through the smoke, Jake could see that the threat had been neutralized. But even as they scored their first successful engagement, Jake noticed something that made his blood run cold. More insurgents were emerging from buildings throughout the village, many more than Sarah's thermal imaging had initially detected. It was becoming clear that this wasn't just a weapons cache or even a simple stronghold. This was a major enemy base of operations, possibly housing 50 or more fighters. Base Command, this is Reaper 1 with an updated situation report. Enemy numbers are much higher than initially estimated. We're looking at a major concentration of hostile forces. Recommend you expedite that backup. Reaper 1, we're doing everything we can. Additional air support is being scrambled from 2 different bases. Hold your position and continue to engage as necessary. Jake brought the Apache around for another attack run, but this time he noticed something that sent a chill down his spine. Several of the insurgents were setting up what appeared to be sophisticated anti-aircraft weapons. Not just RPGs, but actual surface-to-air missile systems. Sarah, are you seeing what I'm seeing down there? If you mean the SAM sites they're setting up, yes, I am. Jake, I think we've flown into something much bigger than anyone realized. This isn't just a weapons cache or even a normal enemy stronghold. This looks like a major command and control center. As if to confirm Sarah's assessment, Jake's radio suddenly came alive with a new transmission. This time, the voice was different, calmer, more professional, and speaking in nearly perfect English. American pilots, my name is Colonel Mahmoud Hassan, formerly of the Iraqi Republican Guard. You have discovered our regional headquarters, and I compliment you on your flying skills. However, you are now outnumbered and outgunned. I am prepared to offer you one opportunity to land safely and surrender. After that, my men will demonstrate why we have been so successful against your forces in this region. Jake felt a cold determination settle over him. He had faced overwhelming odds before, and his Apache had never failed him yet. More importantly, he knew that if this was indeed a major enemy command center, destroying it could save countless coalition lives in future operations. Sarah, how long until our backup arrives? 18 minutes at the earliest. Probably closer to 25 minutes for the full support package. Jake made his decision. We're not running away from this fight. These people have been planning attacks against our people, and we have a chance to put a serious dent in their operations. But we're going to be smart about it. I want you to start with their air defense systems, then focus on anything that looks like command and control equipment. The Apache banked sharply and dove toward the village once again, but this time Jake was flying an unpredictable pattern that would make it difficult for enemy gunners to track them. Sarah's targeting system locked onto the largest of the surface-to-air missile sites, and She fired a Hellfire missile that streaked through the air and obliterated the position in a ball of orange flame. But even as they scored another successful hit, Jake could see that the enemy was adapting quickly to their presence. Insurgents were taking cover in positions that would be difficult to target from the air, and others were setting up what appeared to be coordinated fields of fire that would make low-altitude attack runs extremely dangerous. The radio crackled again with Colonel Hassan's voice. "Impressive, American pilots. But you have only delayed the inevitable. My men have been fighting in this desert for years, and we have prepared for encounters with your helicopters. You will find that we are not easily intimidated." Jake didn't bother to respond to the enemy transmission. Instead, he focused on maintaining his irregular flight pattern while Sarah continued to engage targets below. The Apache's chain gun was working overtime, sending streams of 30mm rounds into enemy positions throughout the village. But as they completed their third attack run, Jake noticed that his fuel gauge was beginning to show the first signs of concern. Combat flying, especially the kind of aggressive maneuvering he had been doing, consumed fuel at a much higher rate than normal flight operations. If the backup took much longer to arrive, they might be forced to return to base for refueling, leaving the enemy's stronghold intact. "Sarah, keep an eye on our fuel consumption. We need to make every shot count from here on out." "Roger that. I'm prioritizing high-value targets and trying to maximize the effectiveness of each engagement." As Jake brought the Apache around for another attack run, he could see that their efforts were having a significant impact on the enemy position. Several buildings were now burning, and the organized resistance was beginning to break down into smaller, less coordinated groups. But he also knew that the most dangerous part of their mission was yet to come. Cornered enemies often fought with desperate ferocity, and Colonel Hassan had proven to be a cunning and resourceful adversary. The next few minutes would determine whether Jake and Sarah could maintain their advantage until backup arrived, or whether they would find themselves overwhelmed by an enemy that had been preparing for exactly this kind of confrontation. As the Apache dove toward the village once more, Jake felt the familiar mixture of fear and excitement that came with aerial combat. This was what he had trained for, and he was determined to prove that American military aviation was still the best in the world. The Apache shuddered as a burst of heavy machine gun fire passed dangerously close to the cockpit. Jake felt the familiar surge of adrenaline as he threw the helicopter into a sharp banking turn, using every bit of his flight training to keep them alive. Below, muzzle flashes lit up the village like deadly fireflies as insurgents poured concentrated fire into the sky. "That was too close," Sarah muttered through the intercom, her voice tight with concentration. "They're getting better at tracking our movement patterns." Jake had noticed the same thing. The enemy fighters weren't just randomly shooting at the sky. They were beginning to predict his flight path and coordinate their fire accordingly. Colonel Hassan hadn't been bluffing when he claimed his men were experienced at fighting helicopters. "Time to change tactics," Jake announced, pulling the Apache up to a higher altitude. "We're going to use our range advantage and force them to come out of their defensive positions." From their new position at 1,500 feet, Jake and Sarah could see the full scope of the enemy's stronghold. The village was larger than it had appeared from ground level, with several buildings connected by underground tunnels that allowed fighters to move between positions without exposing themselves to air attack. Smoke was rising from at least 6 different locations where their previous attacks had found their marks, but plenty of enemy positions remained active. "Jake, I'm counting at least 30 confirmed enemy combatants still in fighting positions," Sarah reported, scanning through her thermal imaging system. "They've got heavy weapons positioned in at least 8 different buildings, and I'm seeing what looks like a mobile SAM launcher moving between the structures." The mobile surface-to-air missile system was particularly concerning. Unlike the fixed positions they had destroyed earlier, a mobile launcher could appear from behind cover, fire at the Apache, and then disappear again before Sarah could return fire. It was a classic guerrilla warfare tactic that had proven effective against helicopter operations throughout the region. Jake's radio crackled with an incoming transmission from Base Command. "Reaper 1, This is Base Command with an update on your backup. We have two F-16 Fighting Falcons en route to your position, ETA 12 minutes. Additionally, a second Apache helicopter team is being scrambled and should arrive within 20 minutes. Base Command, this is Reaper 1. Roger that. Be advised that enemy forces include mobile anti-aircraft systems and sophisticated defensive positions. Recommend the F-16's approach with caution and be prepared for coordinated surface-to-air missile fire. Even as Jake was reporting to Base Command, Sarah suddenly stiffened in her gunner's seat. "Jake, I've got a missile launch. Mobile SAM system just lit us up from the northeast corner of the village." Jake's response was instantaneous and born from hundreds of hours of training. He threw the Apache into a steep dive while simultaneously releasing chaff and flare countermeasures. The surface-to-air missile streaked past them, its heat-seeking guidance system confused by the hot flares that Jake had deployed. "That was way too close," Sarah said, her voice betraying a slight tremor. "These guys are definitely not amateurs." Jake pulled out of the dive and began flying an erratic pattern designed to make it difficult for enemy gunners to track them. The mobile SAM launcher had disappeared back into cover, but he knew it would emerge again for another shot as soon as its crew had reloaded. "Sarah, do you have eyes on where that launcher went?" "Negative. It ducked behind that large building on the north side of the village. Could be anywhere by now." Jake made a tactical decision that would prove crucial to the outcome of their mission. Instead of continuing to hunt for the mobile launcher, he decided to focus on destroying the buildings that could provide it with cover. If they could collapse or damage enough structures, the launcher would be forced to operate in open ground where Sarah could engage it effectively. "Change of plan. We're going to start bringing down buildings. Focus on the larger structures that can hide vehicles. Make them come out and fight in the open." Sarah adjusted her targeting priorities and fired a Hellfire missile at the largest building in the village. The missile's high-explosive warhead punched through the mud brick walls and detonated inside the structure, sending chunks of debris flying in all directions. The building didn't collapse completely, but it was no longer suitable for hiding vehicles or heavy equipment. As they continued their attack on the village infrastructure, Jake noticed something that made him smile grimly. Insurgents were beginning to run from building to building in the open, trying to relocate to positions that hadn't been damaged. This gave Sarah clear shots at personnel targets that had previously been hidden behind cover. "I'm seeing multiple runners between buildings," Sarah announced, engaging with the chain gun. The Apache's 30mm cannon roared to life again, sending high-explosive rounds into groups of enemy fighters who were caught in the open. Jake could see through his cockpit window that their tactics were working. The enemy's coordinated defense was beginning to break down into smaller, less effective units. But Colonel Hassan wasn't finished yet. Jake's radio suddenly came alive with the enemy commander's voice, this time speaking in rapid Arabic to his fighters. Although Jake couldn't understand the words, the tone was unmistakably that of a leader rallying his troops for a final effort. "Sarah, that sounded like Hassan giving new orders to his men. Stay alert for changes in their tactics." Sure enough, within moments of the radio transmission, enemy fighters began emerging from buildings throughout the village. But instead of running for new cover, they were setting up coordinated firing positions in the open areas between structures. It was a desperate but potentially effective tactic. They were sacrificing concealment in favor of concentrated firepower. "Jake, they're setting up what looks like a coordinated ambush in the central courtyard. I count at least 15 fighters with heavy weapons, and they're all aiming at the same airspace. If we fly into that kill zone, they'll have overlapping fields of fire that will be very difficult to avoid." Jake studied the enemy positions below and realized that Colonel Hassan had just made a very intelligent tactical decision. By concentrating his remaining forces in the open, he was forcing the Apache to either engage them directly, which would mean flying through their coordinated fire, or stay at long range where many of the helicopter's weapons would be less effective. "Looks like our friend down there knows his business," Jake acknowledged. "But two can play at that game. I'm going to set up a firing pattern that uses our mobility advantage. We'll hit them from multiple angles before they can adjust their defensive fire. Jake began flying the Apache in a complex pattern around the village, approaching the enemy position from a different direction each time Sarah engaged targets. The insurgents in the courtyard were forced to constantly readjust their aim, making it difficult for them to maintain the concentrated fire that their tactics required. But even as they scored multiple hits on enemy positions, Jake could see that his fuel gauge was becoming a serious concern. Combat flying consumed fuel at an alarming rate, and they had been engaged in intensive maneuvering for nearly 30 minutes. If backup didn't arrive soon, they would be forced to break off the engagement and return to base. Sarah, how much ammunition do we have left? We're down to about 60% of our 30mm rounds, and I've used 3 of our Hellfire missiles. Still have plenty of Hydra rockets, though. Jake was about to respond when his radio crackled with the best news he had heard all day. Reaper 1, this is Falcon Lead. 2 F-16s approaching your position from the southwest. We have visual contact with smoke rising from the target area. Request immediate situation briefing. Falcon Lead, this is Reaper 1. You're a beautiful sight. We have approximately 30 enemy combatants concentrated in a village stronghold. They have mobile SAM systems and coordinated heavy weapons. Recommend you approach from high altitude and be prepared for surface-to-air missile fire. Roger that, Reaper 1. We're equipped with precision-guided munitions and anti-radiation missiles. Can you mark the most dangerous targets for us? Jake felt a surge of relief. The F-16s carried much more firepower than his Apache, and their speed would make them difficult targets for the enemy's anti-aircraft weapons. More importantly, their arrival would allow him to conserve fuel and ammunition while still maintaining pressure on the enemy position. Sarah, use our laser designator to mark that mobile SAM launcher if you can find it. The F-16s can take it out with their precision weapons. Sarah began scanning the village with the Apache's targeting laser, searching for the mobile surface-to-air missile system that had nearly shot them down earlier. After several tense minutes, she spotted movement behind a partially collapsed building on the eastern edge of the village. Got it. Mobile launcher is trying to relocate to a new firing position. Laser is painting the target now. Falcon Lead, this is Reaper 1. We have laser designation on a mobile SAM system at the eastern edge of the target area. Priority target for immediate engagement. Reaper 1, this is Falcon Lead. We have your laser designation and target identification. Engaging with precision-guided munitions. Clear the area. Jake pulled the Apache back to a safe distance and watched as one of the F-16s dove toward the village. A small explosion beneath the fighter's wing indicated that a precision-guided bomb had been released. Moments later, the eastern edge of the village disappeared in a massive fireball as the bomb found its target. Direct hit, Sarah called out. That launcher is definitely out of action. But even as they celebrated the successful strike, Jake noticed that the insurgents in the central courtyard were not giving up. If anything, the arrival of additional coalition aircraft seemed to have made them more determined to fight. Several fighters were setting up what appeared to be additional shoulder-fired missiles, probably hoping to get lucky shots at the faster-moving F-16s. Falcon Lead, be advised that enemy forces have multiple portable anti-aircraft weapons. Recommend you maintain high altitude for your attack runs. Roger that, Reaper 1. We're going to work over their positions with cluster munitions. Should break up their coordinated defense pretty effectively. Jake watched as both F-16s climbed to high altitude and began their attack run on the village. The sound of their jet engines was barely audible over the Apache's rotor noise, but Jake could see the small black shapes of cluster bombs falling from their wings. Within seconds, the central courtyard of the village erupted in a series of smaller explosions as the cluster munitions spread their deadly cargo across the enemy positions. The effect was immediate and devastating. The coordinated defensive fire from the courtyard stopped abruptly as insurgents either took cover or were eliminated by the cluster bomb attack. Jake could see through his cockpit window that the enemy's organized resistance was finally beginning to collapse. But Colonel Hassan wasn't finished yet. As the F-16s climbed back to altitude after their successful attack, Jake's radio crackled with one final transmission from the enemy commander. American pilots, you have won this battle through superior firepower, not superior tactics. My men, and I have held our position longer than your intelligence predicted, and we have proven that we can stand and fight against your best equipment. Remember this when you plan your future operations in our land. Jake felt a grudging respect for the enemy commander. Hassan had indeed put up a more effective fight than anyone had expected, and his fighters had shown considerable skill and determination. But respect didn't change the tactical reality of the situation. The enemy stronghold was essentially destroyed, and coalition forces had gained valuable intelligence about insurgent operations in the region. Reaper 1, this is Falcon Lead. We're going to make one more pass to finish off any remaining resistance. Then, we'll escort you back to base. Your fuel situation looks like it might be getting critical. Jake checked his fuel gauge and confirmed that the F-16 pilot was right. They had enough fuel to make it back to base, but not enough for any extended combat operations. It was time to let the faster, more heavily armed F-16s finish the mission. Falcon Lead, this is Reaper 1. Roger that. We're ready to head home. Thanks for the assistance. Couldn't have finished this mission without you. As the Apache turned toward home, Jake took one last look at the village below. Smoke was rising from at least a dozen different locations, and he could see no signs of organized enemy resistance. What had started as a simple mission to destroy a weapons cache had turned into a major engagement that had eliminated an important enemy stronghold. Sarah, what's your assessment of the mission? I'd say we accomplished way more than anyone expected when we took off this morning. That weapons cache turned out to be the least important thing in that village. Taking out Hassan's command center is going to disrupt enemy operations throughout this entire region. Jake nodded in agreement as he set course for their base. The mission had been far more dangerous than anticipated, but it had also been far more successful. The intelligence gained from overflying the stronghold, combined with the destruction of the enemy's command and control capabilities, would save coalition lives in future operations. But as the Apache flew through the clear desert air towards safety, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this engagement was far from over. Colonel Hassan had spoken with the confidence of a man who had backup plans, and enemy commanders in this region were known for their ability to adapt and relocate their operations quickly. The radio crackled with a transmission from Base Command. Reaper 1, ground intelligence teams are standing by to move into the target area as soon as you confirm it's secure. We want to gather as much information as possible before any remaining enemy forces can sanitize the site. Base Command, this is Reaper 1. Target area appears secure, but recommend ground teams approach with caution. Enemy commander demonstrated significant tactical competence, and there may be booby traps or delayed ambushes. As they continued their flight back to base, Jake found himself thinking about the missing ground patrol that had prompted their expanded search of the area. In all the excitement of the engagement with the enemy stronghold, there had been no opportunity to search for the missing soldiers. Sarah, remind me to ask Base Command about that missing patrol when we get back. If they're still out there somewhere, they might need medical attention or evacuation. Already on my list of things to report during our debrief. This whole mission is going to require a very detailed report for intelligence analysis. The remainder of the flight passed uneventfully, with the two F-16s providing escort until the Apache was safely within the protective range of their base's air defense systems. As Jake began his approach to the landing pad, he could see ground crews standing by to refuel and rearm the helicopter for potential follow-up missions. Landing the Apache after a successful combat mission always felt like a small victory in itself. As the helicopter settled onto the tarmac and Jake began shutting down the engines, he felt the familiar mixture of relief and satisfaction that came with completing a dangerous mission successfully. Good flying today, Jake, Sarah said as she began securing her weapon systems. That was definitely not what we expected when we took off this morning. Jake smiled as he completed his post-flight checklist. That's what makes this job interesting. You never know when a routine mission is going to turn into something completely different. But even as Jake and Sarah prepared to exit the Apache and begin their mission debriefing, neither of them realized that their encounter with Colonel Hassan and his fighters was far from over. The enemy commander had indeed survived the attack on a stronghold, and he was already planning his response to the coalition forces that had disrupted his operations. The real test of their skills was yet to come. The debriefing room at Forward Operating Base Phoenix was thick with tension as Jake and Sarah recounted their encounter with Colonel Hassan's stronghold. Intelligence officers filled every available chair, taking notes and asking detailed questions about enemy tactics, weapon systems, and defensive positions. Major Patricia Williams, the base intelligence chief, had been questioning them for over an hour. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Major Williams said, consulting her notes. "What you initially thought was a small weapons cache turned out to be a major command and control center with sophisticated anti-aircraft defenses and at least 50 enemy combatants?" Jake nodded. "That's correct, ma'am." Colonel Hassan, assuming that was his real name, demonstrated tactical knowledge that was far beyond what we typically encounter from insurgent forces in this region. His men were disciplined, well-equipped, and they knew how to fight helicopters. Sarah added, their defensive positions were expertly prepared, and they had mobile SAM systems that they used very effectively. If those F-16s hadn't arrived when they did, we might have been in serious trouble. Major Williams made another note and then looked up at both pilots. "We've analyzed the video footage from your targeting systems, and our assessment confirms your observations. This was definitely not a typical insurgent cell. The question is whether this was an isolated stronghold or part of a larger network of similar positions." Before anyone could respond, a young intelligence analyst burst through the door of the debriefing room. "Major Williams, we've got urgent intelligence on that missing ground patrol that Captain Morrison was briefed about this morning." Major Williams looked up sharply. "What kind of intelligence, Sergeant Rodriguez?" "Intercepted radio communications, ma'am. Apparently, the patrol is being held captive by the same group that operated out of that village. The transmissions suggest they're being moved to a secondary location for interrogation." Jake felt his stomach drop. If the missing patrol was in the hands of Colonel Hassan's organization, they were in serious danger. Enemy forces in this region had a reputation for harsh treatment of captured coalition soldiers, and time would be critical for any rescue operation. "Do we have any indication of where they're being moved?" Jake asked. Sergeant Rodriguez consulted his notes. "The radio intercepts mention a location called the Old Fortress, but we haven't been able to identify exactly what that refers to. Could be an abandoned military installation, or maybe just a defensible position in the desert." Major Williams was already reaching for her secure phone. "I need to brief the colonel immediately. If we have coalition personnel in enemy hands, this becomes a top priority rescue mission." As the intelligence officers rushed out of the debriefing room to coordinate with higher command, Jake and Sarah were left alone to process the implications of what they had just learned. The mission that had started as a simple weapons cache destruction had now evolved into something much more complex and dangerous. "Jake, if Hassan's people have our soldiers, they're going to use them as bait to draw us into another ambush," Sarah observed. "Everything about that engagement today suggests these people are smart enough to think several moves ahead." Jake agreed completely. Colonel Hassan had demonstrated tactical sophistication that was unusual for insurgent forces, and he had spoken with the confidence of someone who had contingency plans. If he was indeed holding coalition prisoners, he would almost certainly use them to lure rescue forces into prepared killing zones. 20 minutes later, Major Williams returned to the debriefing room accompanied by Colonel James Mitchell, the base commander. Colonel Mitchell was a veteran of multiple deployments who had earned a reputation for aggressive but intelligent tactical operations. "Captain Morrison, Lieutenant Shun," Colonel Mitchell began without preamble, "we have confirmed that Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson's patrol is being held by enemy forces somewhere in the region. 5 soldiers total, including Thompson himself. Our signals intelligence suggests they're being moved to a fortified position for extended detention." Jake straightened in his chair. Sir, what's the plan for getting them back? That's why I'm here talking to you too, Colonel Mitchell replied. You've had direct contact with this enemy organization, and you understand their capabilities better than anyone else on this base. I want your assessment of what kind of rescue operation would be most likely to succeed. Sarah spoke first. Sir, based on what we observed today, these people are extremely well prepared for helicopter operations. They have mobile SAM systems, coordinated anti-aircraft fire, and they understand how to use terrain and structures to limit our tactical advantages. Jake nodded in agreement. Colonel Hassan specifically mentioned that his men have been fighting helicopters for years. Any rescue operation using conventional helicopter assault tactics is going to be extremely dangerous. Colonel Mitchell considered their assessment carefully. What would you recommend instead? A diversionary attack, sir, Jake replied. If we can make Hassan think we're coming from one direction with a large force, we might be able to insert a small rescue team from an unexpected angle. The key would be coordinating the timing so that the diversion draws their attention away from the prisoners just long enough for the rescue team to get in and out. Interesting approach, Colonel Mitchell said, but it would require precise intelligence about where the prisoners are being held, and we don't have that information yet. As if summoned by the colonel's words, Sergeant Rodriguez appeared in the doorway again. Sir, we got an update on the prisoner location. Drone surveillance has identified a compound about 40 miles northeast of the destroyed village. It matches the description from the intercepted radio communications. Looks like an old Iraqi military installation that's been modified for defensive operations. Colonel Mitchell turned to Jake and Sarah. How quickly can you two be ready for another mission? Jake glanced at Sarah, who nodded slightly. We can be airborne in 30 minutes, sir. Our Apache is already refueled and rearmed. Good. Here's what we're going to do. You two will lead a diversionary attack on the front gate of this compound, supported by the same F-16s that helped you today. While you're keeping their attention focused on aerial threats, we'll insert a special operations team by ground vehicle from the opposite side of the installation. Sarah raised a concern. Sir, if this is the same organization we fought today, they're going to be expecting retaliation. The diversion will need to be convincing enough to make them think it's the main attack. That's exactly what I'm counting on, Colonel Mitchell replied. Your job will be to make enough noise and cause enough damage to their perimeter defenses that they have no choice but to focus all their attention on stopping your attack. The ground team will have about 10 minutes to locate and extract the prisoners before Hassan's people realize what's really happening. Jake felt the familiar mix of excitement and apprehension that came with planning a complex mission. The tactical challenge was significant. They would need to be aggressive enough to hold the enemy's attention while being careful enough to avoid the same kind of sophisticated defenses that had nearly brought them down earlier. What's the timeline for the mission, sir? Jake asked. We launch in 2 hours. That gives the special operations team time to get into position and allows us to coordinate with additional air support if needed. Intelligence suggests that the prisoners are being held in the central building of the compound, which should make the extraction easier once the ground team gets inside the perimeter. Colonel Mitchell headed for the door, then paused and looked back at Jake and Sarah. I want to be clear about something. This enemy organization has proven to be more capable than our initial intelligence suggested. Don't take any unnecessary risks, but don't let that stop you from doing whatever is necessary to bring our people home. After the colonel left, Jake and Sarah spent the next hour reviewing satellite imagery of the target compound and planning their attack approach. The facility was indeed an old military installation with concrete walls, guard towers, and defensive positions that had been updated with modern weapons and communication equipment. This is going to be significantly more dangerous than the village, Sarah observed, studying the compound's layout. Those walls will provide excellent cover for anti-aircraft weapons, and the guard towers give them elevated firing positions that will be hard to neutralize from the air. Jake pointed to a section of the satellite image. But look at this. They've got what appears to be a motor pool on the eastern side of the compound. If we can set that on fire with our initial attack, it will create smoke and confusion that might help cover the special operations team's approach. As they continued their planning, Both pilots were aware that this mission would be even more challenging than their morning engagement. Colonel Hassan had demonstrated that he learned quickly from combat experience, and he would undoubtedly have prepared new defenses based on the tactics that coalition forces had used against his village stronghold. An hour before the mission launch, Jake called his wife Linda on the base's satellite phone system. The connection was crackling with static, but he could hear her voice clearly enough to know that she was worried about him. "Jake, you sound tired. Is everything okay over there?" "Just a long day, honey. We had a more complicated mission than usual, but everything worked out fine." Jake didn't want to worry her with details about the combat action or the upcoming rescue mission. "I saw on the news that there's been increased fighting in your area. Promise me you're being careful." "I promise, Linda. Sarah and I look out for each other, and we've got good people supporting us here." "How are the kids doing?" "Tommy lost his first tooth yesterday, and Jenny is excited because she learned to ride her bike without training wheels. They both ask about you every day." Jake smiled, feeling the familiar ache of missing his family. "Tell them I love them and that I'll be home before they know it. My deployment is more than half over now." After ending the call with his family, Jake found himself thinking about Staff Sergeant Thompson and the 4 other soldiers who were being held prisoner. They had families too, people who were worried about them and waiting for them to come home safely. The rescue mission wasn't just about military objectives. It was about bringing someone's son or daughter, husband or wife, back to the people who love them. 30 minutes before launch time, Jake and Sarah began their pre-flight procedures. The Apache had been loaded with a full complement of weapons, including additional Hellfire missiles and extra ammunition for the 30mm chain gun. The maintenance crew had also installed additional chaff and flare dispensers, recognition that this mission would likely involve heavy anti-aircraft fire. "All systems green," Sarah reported as she completed her weapons checks. "We've got maximum firepower and full defensive countermeasures. Whatever Hassan has waiting for us, we're ready for it." Jake was completing his final engine checks when his radio crackled with a transmission from Colonel Mitchell. "Reaper 1, this is Base Command. Ground team is in position and ready to begin their approach. You are cleared to launch rescue mission as planned." "Base Command, this is Reaper 1. Roger that. Lifting off now." The Apache rose from the landing pad into the late afternoon sky, with the 2 F-16s already circling overhead as escort. The desert landscape looked peaceful and empty, but Jake knew that somewhere out there, 5 coalition soldiers were depending on his crew to create enough chaos and destruction to cover their rescue. As they flew toward the enemy compound, Jake couldn't help but think about Colonel Hassan's parting words from their earlier engagement. The enemy commander had warned that future operations would be more difficult, and Jake suspected they were about to discover exactly what he meant by that threat. "Sarah, what's our ETA to the target?" 28 minutes at current speed. The F-16s are reporting clear weather all the way to the target, and no sign of enemy air activity. Jake settled in for the flight, using the time to mentally rehearse their attack plan. The success of the rescue mission would depend on perfect timing and coordination between the air attack and the ground extraction team. There would be no room for mistakes and no opportunity for a second attempt if something went wrong. As the Apache flew deeper into enemy territory, Jake found himself wondering what kind of defenses Colonel Hassan had prepared at his secondary compound. The enemy commander had proven to be resourceful and adaptive, qualities that would serve him well in preparing for the retaliation that he must have known was coming. "Jake, I'm starting to pick up radio traffic on enemy frequencies," Sarah announced. "Sounds like they're running regular security checks between different positions. These people are definitely maintaining military-level communications discipline." The professional competence of Hassan's organization continued to impress and concern Jake. Insurgent groups typically relied on less sophisticated communication methods, but the radio traffic that Sarah was monitoring suggested a level of operational security that was more characteristic of regular military forces. "Keep monitoring their communications," Jake instructed. "Any intelligence we can gather about their defensive preparations will be useful for the ground team." As they approached the target area, Jake could see the compound in the distance. It looked exactly as described in the satellite imagery. A fortified installation with high concrete walls, guard towers, and what appeared to be vehicle checkpoints at the main entrance. Smoke was rising from several chimneys, indicating that the facility was actively occupied. Base Command, this is Reaper 1, Jake radioed. We have visual contact with the target compound. Beginning our attack approach now. Reaper 1, this is Base Command. Ground team is standing by. You are authorized to commence diversionary attack. Good hunting. Jake took a deep breath and began his descent toward the compound. Whatever Colonel Hassan had prepared for them, they were about to find out. The rescue of 5 coalition soldiers was depending on their ability to convince the enemy that a major air assault was underway, while actually providing cover for a small ground team to slip into the compound and extract the prisoners. As the Apache dropped toward attack altitude, Jake could see muzzle flashes beginning to appear from the guard towers and defensive positions along the compound walls. The battle for the rescue of Staff Sergeant Thompson's patrol was about to begin. The first surface-to-air missile streaked past the Apache's cockpit before Jake even had time to react. Colonel Hassan had indeed learned from their previous engagement. The compound's air defenses were active and waiting for them. Missile launch. Multiple contacts. Sarah shouted through the intercom as she tracked 3 more SAMs climbing toward their position. They had us targeted before we even got close. Jake threw the Apache into a violent evasive maneuver, releasing chaff and flares while diving toward the deck. The missiles exploded harmlessly behind them, but more launches were already lighting up Sarah's threat detection system. Hassan's people had turned the compound into a fortress specifically designed to destroy attacking aircraft. This is way more organized than the village, Jake observed grimly as he leveled out at low altitude. They've had time to prepare properly for our arrival. Despite the deadly reception, Jake knew their mission parameters hadn't changed. Somewhere inside that compound, 5 coalition soldiers were depending on them to create enough chaos to cover a rescue operation. The ground team would be moving into position right now, counting on the air attack to keep enemy attention focused away from their infiltration route. Sarah, start with the guard towers. We need to eliminate their elevated firing positions before they can coordinate anti-aircraft fire. Roger that. Engaging the northeast tower with Hellfire missiles. The first Hellfire missile streaked from the Apache's weapon pylon and punched through the concrete wall of the guard tower, detonating inside the structure with devastating effect. Jake could see enemy fighters falling from the tower as it partially collapsed, but within seconds, additional defenders were moving to take their place. Base Command, this is Reaper 1, Jake radioed. We're taking heavy anti-aircraft fire, but proceeding with diversionary attack. How is the ground team's progress? Reaper 1, ground team is approaching the perimeter wall now. They need approximately 8 more minutes to reach the prisoner location. Continue your attack. 8 minutes. In aerial combat, 8 minutes could feel like an eternity. Jake banked the Apache sharply to avoid another missile launch and began setting up for a strafing run along the compound's main wall. The 30mm chain gun would be less effective against the concrete barriers, but the noise and destruction would help maintain the illusion that this was a full-scale assault. Jake, I'm seeing something that doesn't look right, Sarah announced suddenly. There are way too many fighters in this compound. I count at least 60 to 70 enemy combatants, all in prepared defensive positions. This isn't just a holding facility, it's another major stronghold. Jake felt a cold certainty settle in his stomach. They hadn't just stumbled into another enemy position. They had been deliberately led here. Colonel Hassan had used the capture of the ground patrol as bait to draw coalition forces into attacking a prepared fortress. Sarah, I think we've been set up. Hassan planned this whole thing. Before Sarah could respond, Jake's radio crackled with a transmission in accented English. Captain Morrison, this is Colonel Hassan. Welcome to my second home. I trust you are finding the reception more challenging than our previous encounter. The enemy commander's voice was calm and confident, broadcasting on a standard coalition frequency that he shouldn't have been able to access. Jake realized with growing alarm that Hassan's organization was far more sophisticated than anyone had suspected. "You have walked into a trap, Captain," Hassan continued. "Your rescue mission will fail, and your helicopter will be added to my collection of destroyed coalition aircraft. But I'm a reasonable man. Land now and surrender, and I will guarantee the safety of your prisoners." Jake ignored the surrender demand and focused on maintaining their attack pattern. The F-16s had arrived and were beginning their own assault on the compound's perimeter, dropping precision-guided munitions on the outer defensive positions. But even their additional firepower didn't seem to be reducing the volume of anti-aircraft fire rising from the compound. Falcon lead, this is Reaper 1. Enemy resistance is much heavier than anticipated. This compound has been prepared specifically to engage coalition air assets. Roger that, Reaper 1. We're seeing the same thing. Recommend we focus on creating maximum destruction at the main gate to support the ground team's withdrawal route. Jake agreed with the F-16 pilot's assessment. If the rescue was successful, the ground team would need a clear route to extract the prisoners, and the main gate was the most direct path out of the compound. But as he maneuvered the Apache for another attack run, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Enemy fighters were setting up what appeared to be a sophisticated ambush along the route that the Special Operations Team would have to use for their withdrawal. Hassan had anticipated the rescue mission and was prepared to trap the ground team inside the compound. Base Command, this is Reaper 1 with urgent intelligence. Enemy forces appear to be setting up an ambush along the ground team's extraction route. You need to warn them immediately. Reaper 1, we're trying to reach the ground team now, but their radio has gone silent. They may have had to shut down communications to avoid detection. The situation was rapidly deteriorating into exactly the kind of complex trap that Jake had feared. Hassan had used the prisoners as bait, prepared sophisticated air defenses to deal with the diversionary attack, and positioned additional forces to capture or kill the rescue team. It was a multi-layered ambush that demonstrated tactical planning at a level far beyond typical insurgent capabilities. Sarah, can you see any sign of our ground team on thermal imaging? Negative. Too much interference from fires and explosions inside the compound. But I am seeing large groups of enemy fighters moving toward the eastern wall. That's the direction our people would be coming from. Jake made a critical decision. The rescue mission was in danger of becoming a disaster that would cost additional coalition lives. But abandoning the ground team wasn't an option either. They were already inside the compound and committed to the extraction attempt. Falcon lead, this is Reaper 1. I'm going to try something unconventional. Can you provide suppressive fire on the eastern wall while I take the Apache inside the compound perimeter? Reaper 1, say again? Did you just say you want to fly inside the compound? Affirmative. Our ground team is walking into an ambush, and external fire support isn't going to be enough to help them. I need to get inside those walls and provide direct support. Flying a helicopter inside a fortified compound was an extremely dangerous maneuver that violated most principles of helicopter combat tactics. The Apache would be surrounded by enemy positions, with limited maneuvering room and no clear escape route if something went wrong. But Jake couldn't see any other way to support the ground team effectively. Jake, that's suicide, Sarah protested. We'll be flying into a confined space with enemy positions all around us. One lucky hit and we're done. Maybe, but our people on the ground are going to be dead for certain if we don't do something to help them. Get ready to engage targets inside the compound. Jake pushed the Apache into a steep dive toward the compound's main gate, which had been partially destroyed by the F-16 attacks. The opening was just wide enough for the helicopter to pass through, but it would require precision flying at low altitude while under heavy fire. All units, this is Reaper 1. I'm taking the Apache inside the compound to provide direct support for the ground team. Continue external attacks to keep their perimeter defenses occupied. The Apache dropped through the smoke-filled opening in the compound wall like a deadly bird of prey entering a cage full of hunters. Jake immediately found himself flying between buildings and defensive positions, with enemy fighters on all sides opening fire with everything from small arms to rocket-propelled grenades. Contact left. Multiple fighters with RPGs, Sarah called out, engaging them with the chain gun before they could fire at the helicopter. Jake threw the Apache into a sharp turn between two buildings, using the structures themselves as cover from some of the enemy fire. The confined space made it impossible to use many of his normal evasive maneuvers, but it also meant that enemy fighters had to be careful about their firing angles to avoid hitting their own people. Sarah, do you have eyes on our ground team yet? Negative, still searching. But I can see the building where intelligence said the prisoners are being held. It's that three-story structure in the center of the compound. Jake maneuvered the Apache toward the central building, using what little cover was available from compound structures. As they approached the prisoner facility, he could hear small arms fire coming from inside the building, a sign that the Special Operations Team had indeed reached their objective and was engaged in close-quarters combat with enemy guards. Suddenly, Sarah's voice cut through the intercom with urgent intensity. Jake, I've got eyes on our ground team. They're exiting the central building with what looks like 5 prisoners, but they're taking heavy fire from enemy positions around the courtyard. Jake could see the rescue team now. 6 Special Operations soldiers moving in tactical formation while protecting 5 freed prisoners who appear to be in various states of injury or exhaustion. Enemy fighters were converging on their position from multiple directions, and the ground team was clearly outnumbered. Time to even the odds, Jake muttered, bringing the Apache into a hover above the courtyard. Sarah, engage any enemy positions that are firing at our people. The Apache's chain gun opened up with devastating effect, sending streams of 30mm rounds into enemy fighting positions around the courtyard. Jake held the helicopter steady despite incoming fire, giving Sarah clear shots at targets that were threatening the ground team. Ground team leader, this is Reaper 1 providing close air support. What's your status? A voice crackled through Jake's radio above the sound of gunfire. Reaper 1, this is Shadow 6. We have all 5 prisoners secured, but we're taking heavy fire and have 2 wounded. Need immediate covering fire for extraction to the eastern wall. Roger that, Shadow 6. We'll clear a path for you. Jake began flying the Apache in a circular pattern around the ground team's movement route, with Sarah engaging enemy positions as they appeared. The helicopter's presence was having a significant psychological effect on the enemy fighters, many of whom were taking cover rather than maintaining their attacks on the rescue team. But Colonel Hassan's forces were adapting quickly to the new situation. Jake could see enemy fighters setting up coordinated positions that would allow them to engage the Apache while minimizing the risk of hitting their own people. More importantly, he could hear Hassan's voice on the radio, calmly issuing orders in Arabic that were clearly designed to counter the helicopter's interference. Sarah, they're setting up a crossfire pattern. We need to keep moving or they're going to box us in. I see it. Enemy fighters are positioning themselves in the buildings around the courtyard. If we hover in one spot much longer, they'll have overlapping fields of fire that we can't avoid. Jake was about to move the Apache to a new position when his radio crackled with an urgent transmission from the ground team. Reaper 1, Shadow 6. We're encountering heavy resistance at the eastern wall. Enemy forces have blocked our primary extraction route. Need alternate egress path immediately. The situation was becoming critical. The ground team was trapped inside the compound with wounded personnel and rescued prisoners. The Apache was surrounded by enemy positions in a confined space, and Hassan's forces were demonstrating tactical coordination that was making the rescue increasingly difficult. Shadow 6, this is Reaper 1. Can you make it to the main gate? It's been partially cleared by airstrikes. Negative, Reaper 1. Too much open ground between our position and the main gate. We need cover from enemy positions along that route. Jake realized that there was only one way to provide the kind of cover that the ground team needed. He would have to use the Apache as a moving shield, flying between the enemy positions and the rescue team while Sarah engaged targets along their withdrawal route. Sarah, we're going to escort them out on foot. I'll keep the Apache between our people and the enemy positions while you suppress any targets that try to engage them. Jake, that means flying at walking speed while surrounded by enemy fighters. Our fuel situation is also getting critical. We don't have enough for extended hovering operations. Jake checked his fuel gauge and confirmed Sarah's assessment. They had enough fuel to complete the escort mission, but there would be no margin for error or extended combat operations. If anything went wrong during the extraction, they might not have enough fuel to make it back to base. We'll worry about fuel after we get our people out of here, Jake decided. Shadow 6, this is Reaper 1. We're going to provide moving cover for your extraction. Form up behind our aircraft and move toward the main gate on my signal. Reaper 1, Shadow 6. Roger that. My team is ready to move. Jake positioned the Apache between the ground team and the largest concentration of enemy fighters, then began flying slowly toward the main gate while maintaining a low hover. Sarah's chain gun was in constant action, engaging enemy positions that tried to fire at the rescue team as they moved across the compound. The extraction seemed to be working until Colonel Hassan's voice came over the radio one final time. Captain Morrison, you have impressed me with your flying skills and tactical thinking. But this game ends now. Jake was wondering what Hassan meant when Sarah suddenly shouted through the intercom. Jake, massive explosion at the main gate. The entire wall just collapsed. Looking toward their intended exit route, Jake could see that Hassan had detonated charges that brought down a large section of the compound wall. But instead of blocking their escape, the explosion had actually created a much larger opening that would be easier for the ground team to use. Shadow 6. The main gate area is now wide open. Move to extract immediately. As the Special Operations team rushed toward the enlarged opening in the compound wall, Jake realized that Colonel Hassan had made a critical error. By trying to trap them inside the compound, he had actually provided them with a better escape route than they had originally planned. The Apache followed the ground team through the gap in the wall, finally escaping the deadly confined space of the compound interior. As they emerged into open desert, Jake could see coalition vehicles approaching to pick up the rescue team and freed prisoners. Base Command, this is Reaper 1. Ground team and all prisoners are successfully extracted. Mission accomplished. But even as Jake celebrated the successful rescue, he knew that their confrontation with Colonel Hassan was far from over. The enemy commander had proven to be even more capable and resourceful than anyone had imagined, and he was still operating somewhere in the region with significant forces under his command. The Apache climbed away from the compound toward home, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that Hassan had allowed them to escape for reasons of his own. The final phase of their conflict was yet to come. 3 days after the successful rescue mission, Jake was conducting routine maintenance checks on his Apache when Sergeant Rodriguez burst into the hangar with urgent news. The young intelligence analyst was out of breath and carrying a folder marked with the highest security classifications. Captain Morrison, we've intercepted communications that suggest Colonel Hassan is planning a major operation against coalition forces. He's apparently been using the attacks on his strongholds to gather intelligence on our capabilities and response times. Jake looked up from the engine compartment he had been inspecting. What kind of major operation? We're not sure yet, but the intercepted messages mention coordinated attacks on multiple coalition bases using captured American equipment. Intelligence believes Hassan's organization has grown far beyond what we initially assessed. Before Jake could respond, Major Williams appeared in the hangar doorway. Captain Morrison, Lieutenant Shun, you're needed in the command center immediately. We've got a developing situation that requires your expertise. The command center was buzzing with activity when Jake and Sarah arrived. Multiple screens displayed satellite imagery, intercepted communications, and tactical maps of the region. Colonel Mitchell was standing at the center of it all, coordinating with intelligence analysts and operations planners. Captain Morrison, we've just received intelligence that Colonel Hassan is planning to attack this base tonight, Colonel Mitchell announced without preamble. Our signals intelligence suggests he's assembled a force of over 200 fighters, equipped with captured coalition vehicles and weapon systems. Jake felt his blood run cold. An attack on Forward Operating Base Phoenix would put thousands of coalition personnel at risk, including support staff who weren't trained for ground combat. Hassan had clearly escalated beyond guerrilla tactics to conventional warfare. "Sir, what's our defensive posture?" Sarah asked. "We've got good perimeter defenses and adequate personnel for a ground assault, but Hassan's people have demonstrated sophisticated tactical planning. We need to disrupt their attack before they can get close enough to use those captured weapons effectively." Major Williams approached with additional intelligence reports. "We've identified what appears to be their staging area, a valley complex about 15 miles north of here. Drone surveillance shows significant vehicle movement and personnel concentration consistent with preparations for a major assault." Colonel Mitchell turned to Jake and Sarah. "I want you two to take your Apache and conduct a reconnaissance mission over that staging area. We need real-time intelligence on Hassan's capabilities and intentions before we plan our defensive response." Jake nodded, but he felt uneasy about the mission parameters. "Sir, if Hassan is planning an attack on this base, he'll be expecting us to send reconnaissance flights. This could be another trap." "You're probably right," Colonel Mitchell acknowledged. "But we need that intelligence regardless of a risk. Take the F-16s as escort, and be prepared to abort the mission if you encounter overwhelming resistance." As Jake and Sarah prepared for what could be their most dangerous mission yet, they both understood that they were facing an enemy who had learned to anticipate coalition tactics and plan accordingly. Colonel Hassan had proven himself to be a formidable adversary who was always thinking several moves ahead. "Jake, I've got a bad feeling about this mission," Sarah admitted as they walked toward their Apache. "Everything about Hassan's previous operations suggests he wants us to find his staging area. He's probably prepared something special for our arrival." "I know," Jake replied. "But if he's really planning to attack the base, we don't have much choice. Too many people are depending on us to gather the intelligence needed to stop him." The Apache lifted off into the late afternoon sky, accompanied by 2 F-16 Fighting Falcons that would provide high-altitude escort. The flight to the suspected staging area would take approximately 20 minutes, giving Jake time to think about everything they had learned about Hassan's organization over the past few days. The enemy commander had consistently demonstrated capabilities that were far beyond typical insurgent forces. His fighters were well-trained, well-equipped, and capable of sophisticated tactical operations. More importantly, Hassan himself had proven to be a strategic thinker who understood coalition strengths and weaknesses better than most coalition officers would have expected. "Sarah, what's our approach going to be when we reach the target area?" "I recommend we stay at maximum altitude for the initial reconnaissance pass. If Hassan is expecting us, he'll have air defenses positioned to cover the most likely approach routes. We need to see what we're dealing with before we get close enough for his weapons to be effective." As they flew toward the target coordinates, Jake found himself thinking about the conversation he'd had with his wife Linda the night before. She had sensed the tension in his voice during their brief phone call, and he had struggled to reassure her without revealing the dangerous nature of his recent missions. "Any word from home?" Sarah asked, somehow reading his thoughts. "Linda knows something's going on out here, but I can't tell her any details, obviously. She's worried, and I don't blame her. This deployment has turned into something very different from what we originally expected." The target valley came into view as they approached from the south, flying a high altitude to avoid potential air defenses. Through his cockpit window, Jake could see what appeared to be a major military encampment spread throughout the valley floor. There were dozens of vehicles, temporary structures, and what looked like organized unit formations. "Jake, this is way bigger than intelligence estimated," Sarah reported, scanning the area through her targeting systems. "I count at least 40 vehicles, including what appear to be captured coalition Humvees and possibly even an M1 Abrams tank." The presence of an American main battle tank was particularly concerning. If Hassan's forces had indeed captured an M1 Abrams, they possessed firepower that could threaten coalition bases and potentially change the tactical balance in the entire region. "Can you confirm that tank identification?" Jake asked. "Definitely an M1 Abrams, and it appears to be operational." They've also got what looks like captured artillery pieces and possibly anti-aircraft systems that I can't identify from this range. Jake was about to radio their observations to base command when his threat warning system suddenly activated. Multiple surface-to-air missiles were tracking the Apache from positions throughout the valley. Missile launch. Multiple contacts, Sarah shouted as she activated their defensive countermeasures. Jake threw the Apache into evasive maneuvers while releasing chaff and flares, but he could see that Hassan's air defenses were more sophisticated than anything they had encountered before. The missiles were using multiple guidance systems, and some of them were still tracking despite their countermeasures. Falcon lead, this is Reaper 1. We're taking heavy SAM fire from the target area. Enemy air defenses are more extensive than anticipated. Reaper 1, this is Falcon lead. We're seeing the same thing from up here. Count at least 6 separate SAM sites active throughout the valley. Recommend you abort reconnaissance and gain altitude immediately. But even as Jake climbed away from the valley, he realized that Hassan had achieved his objective. The enemy commander had revealed enough of his capabilities to demonstrate the serious threat he posed, while keeping his most important assets hidden from detailed reconnaissance. Base command, this is Reaper 1, Jake radioed. Target area contains major enemy concentration with significant heavy weapons and air defense systems. Estimated force size is much larger than previously assessed. We're returning to base with full intelligence report. The flight back to Forward Operating Base Phoenix gave Jake time to process what they had observed. Hassan wasn't just planning a guerrilla attack on the base. He was preparing for conventional warfare, using captured coalition equipment and sophisticated tactics. The threat level had escalated far beyond what anyone had anticipated. As they approached their home base, Jake could see increased defensive preparations already underway. Additional aircraft were being moved to disperse positions, ground crews were setting up extra air defense systems, and patrols were being established around the perimeter. Colonel Mitchell was waiting for them on a landing pad as soon as the Apache touched down. What did you see out there? Sir, Hassan has assembled what amounts to a conventional military force, Jake reported. At least 40 vehicles including captured coalition equipment, sophisticated air defense systems, and organizational structure that suggests significant command and control capabilities. Colonel Mitchell's expression was grim. Intelligence has been analyzing Hassan's background while you were on reconnaissance. Turns out he's not just a former Iraqi Republican Guard officer. He was a colonel in their elite special operations forces and graduated from military academies in both Baghdad and Moscow. We're dealing with someone who has extensive training in conventional warfare. This revelation explained everything that Jake and Sarah had observed about Hassan's tactical sophistication. They weren't fighting an insurgent leader who had learned tactics through experience. They were facing a professionally trained military officer who understood coalition strengths and weaknesses at an institutional level. Sir, what's our defensive plan? Sarah asked. We're implementing a layered defense that takes advantage of our air superiority while protecting against Hassan's ground capabilities. But I want you two to lead a preemptive strike mission that will disrupt his attack preparations before he can launch his assault. Jake felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with apprehension. A preemptive strike against Hassan's concentrated forces would be extremely dangerous, but it offered the best chance to prevent a much larger battle that could result in significant coalition casualties. When do we launch, sir? 2 hours after sunset. We're going to use darkness as cover for a coordinated attack involving multiple Apache helicopters, close air support from A-10 Thunderbolts, and precision strikes from B-1 bombers. Your Apache will serve as the primary target identification platform for the entire operation. As Jake and Sarah prepared for what would be the most significant mission of their deployment, they both understood that the outcome would likely determine the future of coalition operations in the entire region. Hassan had escalated the conflict to a level that required decisive action. The mission briefing took place in the base's secure planning facility, with representatives from multiple aircraft squadrons and ground units. The scope of the operation was larger than anything Jake had participated in during his deployment, involving coordinated strikes across multiple target areas. The primary objective is to eliminate Hassan's heavy weapons and command capabilities before he can launch his attack, Colonel Mitchell explained to the assembled pilots and crew members. Secondary objectives include destruction of his captured coalition equipment and disruption of his organizational structure. Major Williams added intelligence updates. Hassan's forces have been intercepting our communications and monitoring our flight patterns. He knows we're planning a preemptive strike, and he's prepared countermeasures accordingly. Expect sophisticated air defenses and possible decoy installations designed to waste our ordnance. As the briefing continued, Jake found himself thinking about the strange relationship that had developed between his crew and Colonel Hassan over the course of their multiple engag.